Okay, this is part one. It will probably be a two-part video on the reign of Louis XIV for Civilizations 2. This is for chapter 23, Arts in the Court of Louis XIV. So we're going to be talking about Louis XIV as an absolute monarch. That's a blank page. Louis XIV comes to power. Louis XIV had a long regency. He originally had the throne as a child, and he had to essentially grow into it. So for most of his early reign, he was under the control of a regent. And that was Cardinal Mazarin, who was the successor of the famous Cardinal Richelieu. So Louis, as a child, under the control of a regent. This regent was very unpopular. He'd increase taxes and strengthen the power of the central government at the expense of the nobility. This is due to the leftover effects of medieval feudalism, where rather than power being in control of a central government, a lot of the power was localized. A lot of these nobles or these dukes or these counts or whatever they were had not only power over their own region, but oftentimes more power than the central government itself. There were riots toward the end of Mazarin's regency, and these were led by nobles. These were nobles inciting the peasantry to riot in mobs to threaten the king. But they weren't really threatening the king, they were threatening Mazarin. This sort of revolt went on for a few years, and the peasantry was sort of tired of being played off by one side against another, and this led to this paved the way for an absolute monarchy, because for this to work you had to have the peasantry being supportive in some way, and that wasn't possible without this sort of fed-up nature. This is the Palace of Versailles, probably the most famous element of Louis's court. What Louis did was he moved the court from Paris to Versailles, and he acquired all of the nobles to attend him in court. That's where he held his government. But it wasn't just his government, it was sort of an elaborate system where the nobles would actually be honored to come and do homage to Louis at his palace in Versailles. So Louis takes action to weaken the nobles. His first step was to limit noble power and exclude them from his decisions. So no longer is the king relying on his sort of vassal nobles to carry out his will. He's taking action on his own. This is different from the past. The nobles had always acted as advisors to the king and sort of helped the king make decisions, whether this advice was, hey, I need some help, can you guys come up with an idea? Or whether it was, the king came up with an idea and the nobles were like, yeah, we're not going to do that. It would take both versions, both aspects. So instead of relying on the nobles, he relied on the central government that he had created, the administration, to collect taxes, administer justice, the duties that had previously been part of the nobles. So the nobles had to come to him in order to have these government agents collect taxes and revenue and administer justice in their provinces. So this whole centralization of power around Louis was meant to weaken the nobles. There's another picture of Versailles. This is some of the gardens of Versailles. The chapter talks quite a bit about, Versailles as a piece of artwork, and indeed it is. It's got these kind of classical style gardens throughout the whole grounds, and the palace structure itself is, enormous, as I showed you in the previous picture. And it's meant to impress. And it wasn't just meant to impress, future visitors. It was meant to impress the nobles at the time with the power of Louis and the power of his central government. Most of these pictures, just so you know, are from my own holiday. So if they're not the best, bear with me. They're not professional photographs. This is the throne. This is Louis's throne, and you can see in this carving, this is Louis as this sort of religious figure, riding these horses, showing his power. This was deliberate. This was meant to convey the power of Louis. And you can see the angel up here. The color of her wing and her gown and her dress here are the colors of the flag of France, the tricolor. It's another picture from the inside of the Palace of Versailles. Like I said, I'm not the best photographer, so these aren't going to be the best photos, but you can get the idea of just how grand and opulent this palace is. And this took up a huge amount of the state revenue. Estimates range from anywhere from 3% to more like 18% of the government's revenue went into the creation and upkeep of the Palace of Versailles. Just to put that in context, the Iraq War took up at no point more than 4% of the U.S.'s GDP. Another picture of the palace grounds. You can see, these just sort of elaborate grounds and these elaborate gardens within the grounds, and it just goes on and on. Like it's not just sort of one area that has all this. It just goes on and on and on for like what seems like miles, although it's not quite. But it's extremely impressive and extremely beautiful. But I want to stress again, it was meant to impress. So Louis was also a patron of the arts, and this patronage of the arts was meant to show the power and the grandeur of Louis. So these are some of the major artists, whatever form they took, you need to be aware of. Jean Racine wrote tragedies based on Greek myths. So these were a modern adaptation of ancient Greek myth that is, this is a byproduct of the lingering effects of the Renaissance, where you have Greek and Roman myths and legends making their way back west after being preserved in Greece during the Middle Ages. Molière wrote comedies that made fun of French society, the most famous of which, and I believe the one in the book, is The Miser. It just makes fun of sort of, it's poking fun at the nobility, essentially. And Molière wrote several comedies that had a similar effect. The ballet dance became popular at court, making its way from the East, from Austria. And the French Academy of Art was officially sponsored by Louis, making it the center of arts and sciences in France. When today we think of France as a focal point of art and literature and culture, this has its roots in Louis' patronage of the arts. This is really what started the concept of France as a cultural center. Oops. Sorry about that. And that was just my alarm that it's almost time for me to go. So let's just sort of, try to finish up from here. Patronage of the arts and the strengthening of royal power. Louis was very active in government affairs. He wasn't just, a ruler that sort of left the day-to-day affairs of government in the hands of others. This is because he learned the danger of having a decentralized government without a head during his long regency. So he used Richelieu's policies as a guideline of how to run his state, and he expanded the bureaucracy and appointed intendants to carry out the government function. Remember, these intendants are taking over the roles normally in the power of the nobles, and normally carried out by the nobles to centralize his government and limit the power of the government. Now, the power of the nobles, sorry, not the power of the government. The power of the government was in Louis's hands. Usually government jobs were given to members of the middle class, wealthy merchants, and so on. And this was again to shift the power of government away from the traditional nobility and more toward the new powers of France. Louis also maintained his own standing army. It was called a retinue. It was about 300,000 soldiers, making it the most powerful army in all of Europe. And this obviously put another burden on the state revenues, because this army had to be paid for, where before usually the army would be provided by the nobles as part of their feudal obligation. This made this provision of the army by the nobles unnecessary, because Louis had his own army, and this army had to be paid for through the money raised by the intendants. But nonetheless, this is a significant drain on state resources, probably in the range of 10 to 15% of state revenue. So a similar amount of money that was being spent on Versailles also being spent on Louis' standing army. Okay. Let's talk about Jean-Baptiste Colbert and mercantilism. Colbert was Louis' finance minister, and he used mercantilist policies to make France a wealthy state. Mercantilism was the concept of importing raw materials from colonies to make cheap materials for domestic manufacturers. You know, I talked a couple classes ago about the effects of the discovery of the colonies on Europe and how it generated wealth for Europe. And mercantilism is essentially taking advantage of these market conditions, using cheap stuff from the colonies, bringing it back to France or England or wherever, and making stuff that you then sold domestically. One thing you have to do if you're going to be a mercantilist, if you're going to have this sort of bring stuff from abroad, bring it back here, make it into stuff, sell it, is you can't have other people selling their stuff. So what they did was they imported high tariffs, which is a tax on imported goods from other nations, so that, you know, if you want to buy your wool from England, it's not going to be worth your while to do so, because after the high tariffs, it's going to be more expensive than equivalent stuff from France. Louis ruled France for 72 years, including the first 10 years or so when he was not in control of the government. And he spent a lot of his time at war, partially because he was encouraged by his own power, but also partially to keep the nobles occupied, and through military action, there was this sense of French victory and French power that would keep the nobles sort of active. Obviously, the rest of Europe didn't like this, and they attempted to oppose Louis' expansion of power. And they felt that Europe should have a balance of power rather than one belligerent state. The most famous of these wars was the War of Spanish Succession, where Louis' grandson Philippe was going to inherit the throne of France, and Louis was trying to put him on the throne. The other nations of Europe believed that this would make France even more powerful, making France and Spain essentially one nation. And that wasn't really, Spain isn't really that big a prize. What was the prize was the Spanish colonies abroad. So that's really what it was about, through this throne of Spain, the Spanish colonies abroad. The war lasted 13 years, and at the end it was sort of a compromise. Philippe could remain king of Spain, but France could not try to unite the two crowns into one nation. So we're going to stop here for this video. I'm going to make another video with the rest of things today. I'm going to make it, another day, another time. So I'm going to look completely different, in a different setting, different background. But don't let that distract you. This is the same thing, and we'll pick up here where we've left off.